Thank you, Chairman. Welcome, Madam Secretary. We've had some discussion here on the deficit, and I thought it might be helpful if you could remind us of the relative role of the Trump tax cuts in creating the current structural deficit.
Well, the Trump tax cuts added hugely to the deficit. As I recall, it was something like $2 trillion over 10 years. Yeah. And so that is a major contributor to the deficits that we have.
Pivoting quickly to the banking situation, as chair designate of the Joint Economic Committee, I was very pleased that the administration acted quickly to ensure that small banks and depositors don't take the brunt of the Silicon Valley Bank failure. But I also suspect that this is a disaster that could have been prevented. When Congress voted to roll back key regulatory provisions back in 2018, I was also vice chair of the JEC at the time, and I warned that weakening these rules put the health of the banking system at risk. And in fact, I released a report, a JEC report, that named SVB Financial Group specifically as one of the banks that would face nearly none of the enhanced regulations originally put in place in the Dodd-Frank legislation. How can regulators shore up confidence and stability in this asset class of banks, and do they need additional tools in order to improve the stability throughout the entire financial system?
So I absolutely think that it's appropriate to conduct a very thorough review of what factors were responsible for the failure of these banks. And it is true that there was legislation that weakened bank regulation, and there were also regulatory decisions by the Federal Reserve and other banking agencies. There's also a question of supervision and how that's conducted. I was pleased to see that Vice Chair for Supervision, the Fed's Vice Chair for Supervision, Michael Barr, is undertaking and will report by May on an investigation of what's involved. And certainly we should be reconsidering what we need to shore up regulation to prevent this. This was a very unusual set of circumstances that Silicon Valley Bank faced. It appears that they had significant interest rate risk that they were subject to, and an exceptionally high, over 90% of their deposits were uninsured, and that is,
that number is well outside of the norm.
So in that sense, this was an unusual bank, but I think it's appropriate to review all of that.
Do you have any thoughts at all on the nature of, this is basically our first digital bank run in a way, the way that the fire sort of spread.
Yes.
How should we be thinking about that in the role of providing proper oversight and de-risking these financial institutions going forward, given that that is very much the world we live in now?
So this was an overwhelmingly rapid run on a bank. To the best of my knowledge, we've never seen deposits flee at the pace that they did from Silicon Valley Bank. Now, many of the depositors were, startup tech firms that work with venture capitalists that also bank. And there was, as you say, an internet essentially shouting fire in a movie theater. And perhaps it's the case that now in the world we live in, that although this was a small community with a disproportionate share of Silicon Valley Bank's deposits, this kind of thing may more readily happen now. And it means that in general, when we do liquidity stress tests on banks or think about liquidity requirements, perhaps some of the assumptions that go into modeling the pace at which deposits might flee, maybe some of those need to be updated and rethought. But This is a new phenomenon. We haven't seen this before.
I think
and
it's an
it
important
needs
question.
rethinking.
It's the world we live in today. Some House Republicans recently introduced a bill that would force Treasury to prioritize covering debt held by foreign debt holders like the Chinese government before financing Department of Defense, the VA, really every federal funding priority outside of Social Security and Medicare. You've referred to this plan as default by another name and have pointed out that it's really not logistically feasible for Treasury to prioritize payments given how Treasury operates. What do you think of this plan to prioritize things like foreign investments over current and former service members and other obligations that we have as federal government?
Well, we have a set of bills that come due, and it's our obligation, and my obligation as Treasury Secretary to see that those bills are paid, and not some of the bills, and to decide which bills are more important than other bills, simply to pay the bills for programs and spending that Congress has authorized. That's why I say prioritization is default by another name. Not paying any of our bills is default. And when you think about the pain that it would cause to Social Security recipients, to food stamp recipients, you name it, people, to vendors who've supplied services to the government and have their own payrolls to meet, to be told they're not going to be paid, the government isn't going to honor those bills, that's a default. And rating agencies, particularly Fitch, has already clearly indicated that a failure to pay all of the government's bills when they're due would certainly compromise our credit rating. So this has never been tried. It's been rejected by all past Treasury secretaries. And I would say our systems, our payment systems, are simply set up to pay all the government's bills when they come due. They're not set up to divide payments into different types as a general matter, and to be able to say, yes, this, and this, we're paying, and these other things we're holding back. For many agencies, payments of all types are all mixed together in ways that couldn't be disentangled.
Thank you, Chairman.